to the issue of gasoline regulation, because once again we see some members of this House who have a selective memory when it comes to the regulations. Mr. Speaker, perhaps some of them were not paying attention during the summer of 2004 and 2005. And since that may be the case, I think a little history might be enlightening. I remember those days. I remember the conversations around my office. I remember the comments on the street when I met with people, or when I stopped to buy gasoline myself. And Mr. Speaker, it didn't matter what political stripe an individual was, the concerns were the same. Mr. Speaker, consumers were upset for three main reasons. Firstly, the price of gasoline was going steadily up. Sometimes the price would jump up and down 2 or 3 cents a litre on the very same day. And it didn't make sense to consumers. They were angry because they felt they were being taken advantage of. Secondly, there didn't seem to be anyone looking out for consumers. Prices went up and prices went down, but there was never any real explanation offered for why that was happening. Consumers wanted transparency, and they weren't getting that from the oil companies for sure. Mr. Speaker, the third reason consumers were upset is because at times, prices in one end of the province were high and stayed high. And even when prices in other regions decreased, it often took 2 or 3 days before those decreases reached consumers in other regions. And in some cases, the price difference was as much as 6 cents per litre, so it was significant. And while all this was going on, and consumers were becoming more and more frustrated, gasoline dealers were crying out for help. They were slowly being squeezed out of business and leaving some communities with no local gas station. And I know that that's a fact, Mr. Speaker. In my area of Kings North, there used to be a significant number of places to buy retail gasoline. And in my memory, in my recent memory, those locations have been lost in villages and communities called Grafton and Woodville and Centerville and Sheffield Mills and Canning, which means a hardship for those particular communities and for many people who live in the vicinity. And because of that experience, retailers marched on the legislature and filled the gallery. They spoke, I know they did this, to every MLA who would listen. Mr. Speaker, Graham Conrad and the Retail Gasoline Dealers Association of Nova Scotia at the time asked members of this House to help them. They asked for help for hundreds of small family businesses and communities across this province, because that is what your local gas retailer is, a small local business person who is trying to make a living selling gas and providing a service to their community. The gas retailers ask for help so they can earn a living and provide for their families, Mr. Speaker. And I know that one of those people at that time who was very interested in seeing regulation come into place was Scott Fraser, who owns and operates the Milne Court Petrocan in New Minas. And he made a point of speaking out in that issue and expressing gratitude when regulation was put in place. And Mr. Speaker, it's important to remember that the person who pumps gas, who operates the cash register, who helps with directions if you need them, these people, and often those particular people are the retailers themselves, Mr. Speaker, work very hard. They're providing jobs in our local economy, and they buy products that other Nova Scotians produce. This government remembers that, Mr. Speaker. We value, Mr. Speaker, every job in Nova Scotia. Running a retail gas station is hard work, and retailers provide a valuable service to their local community. That's why those who remember the Select Committee on Petroleum Product Pricing held a series of meetings and hearings in 6 regional centres across the province. At that time, the people spoke loudly. They were unhappy. They were very unhappy with what was happening. They believed that there was a better way, and they asked the Select Committee to take action. The committee recommended regulation based on the model that was being used at the time in Prince Edward Island. I'd like to remind you that there were Liberals on the committee. I see a few of them sitting in the House today. There were Conservatives on that committee. And there were New Democrats on that committee too. What seems to me to get lost or ignored in the shuffle is that members of all three political stripes endorsed the report. But now, Mr. Speaker, we have our Liberal members trying to convince people to go back to the future. Well, the fact is, doing that will only get you more of what you already had in the past.
No vision. No vision.
No vision, and none of us like the price. None of us, though, Mr. Speaker, like the price of gas. But regulation by the UARB sets the price on what the actual cost of gasoline is. The price is not based, as some people might think, on crude prices, but on the gasoline and diesel that you actually put in the tank of your car. Now, mind you, gasoline prices are related to what happens in the global marketplace. We're not connected, as all of us in this House know, to a Western pipeline. So that has an impact on the price of gasoline. European pricing and the demand in Europe affects the gasoline prices that we pay. Middle East instability affects the price we pay. But, Mr. Speaker, I do want the members of this House to know that our government is committed to work with other maritime provinces to determine if extending the pipeline that would bring gas to eastern Canada, to the Atlantic Canada, would actually be a benefit. And that's something that will happen in the future. Mr. Speaker, consumers are protected from unilateral decisions by a retailer or a wholesaler with regulation to charge a few pennies more just because they're the only reasonable options or in a position to do so. The UARB allows a margin of 6 cents for a wholesaler and for a retailer from 4.8 to 6.6 cents per litre. And I know how important that is to local retailers. Just today, I made a point of calling a couple of local retailers who provide some services in Kings North. They both told me that the regulation has made a difference to them. In one case, it's the retailer said, "This has kept me in business, otherwise I would be closed." The second one talked about the stability of the margin and making a huge business and the ability to move forward. So the mathematical formula in this doesn't change. The margins are fixed and consumers can't be gouged, and retailers get something they can count on. The board publishes a formula each week so consumers can see exactly how the price of gasoline is set. It's an open and transparent process that doesn't leave consumers scratching their heads. It also allows consumers to plan their purchases and have a fair chance to buy gasoline without paying one price in the morning and a different price when they go home for supper. That price cap is important unless you want to argue that the fluctuating prices we saw in 2004 or 5 don't matter to consumers, but Mr. Speaker, the people I talk to don't see it that way. Equally important, if you live in Yarmouth or Sydney, regulation treats you fairly, just like every other region in the province. And another way that we get treated fairly is that the price of gasoline with the regulation is also based on transportation costs. So if you live in Bridgewater or you live in Truro, you pay for that transportation, but you don't pay a price based on some arbitrary decision that a local retailer might make. So regulation works, Mr. Speaker. We don't like to pay the price of gasoline, perhaps, but regulation works. Regulation protects consumers from even higher prices. Regulation protects small, local business people in many communities. Regulation is free from government interference, and regulation gives us fair and reasonable gas prices. Gas prices are going up all over the world. Mr. Speaker, Canada has the second lowest gas prices of the G8 industrialized nations. Only the United States has lower prices, and even in the U.S., some prices are higher in some places. Gas regulation cannot put a bubble over Nova Scotia and isolate us from the global economy. But, Mr. Speaker, it can make gas prices fair and reasonable and gives us predictable changes for consumers and ensures every reason is treated with equal fairness. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. We'll now recognize the honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's with sort of pleasure I get up and talk about this, the gas regulation and the pricing of gas. I know in my constituency I'm seeing a lot of people that are having financial problems, and one of the contributors to that is regulation on gasoline. When this government took power in 2009, the price of gasoline was $1.05. Today, it was $1.42.4. $1.42.4. That's pretty well a 40% increase, and last week it was $1.45, over $1.45. So it's over a 40% increase in those very short 3 years since the NDP government was elected. And, you know, when you look at this and you see what this government, prior to this, the finance minister and the premier were so against this tax on tax that they call now, and they still keep in place. They keep it in place because it generates millions of dollars to the coffers of the province. Well, at the same time, the province is cutting services. They're cutting education, funding to education. They're cutting funding to hospitals and health care. And it makes you wonder what the story is. They put the GST up 2%, which put the price of gasoline up as well, because that is where the tax on tax comes in. And when you look at that, an average family, it's a tremendous burden on them, because most people in this province have to travel to work, to school, even to shop. It's just the way our people have lived and traditionally lived. And I'll give you an example of a really dire situation I've seen many, many times. The people in the rural areas that have to travel a substantial distance for treatments at perhaps the QE2 or the VG or the Dartmouth General come in, have to travel every day here to Metro and for treatments every day. Some people have to come for a month or more at a time for maybe some kind of radiation treatment or some other treatments. Well, that is very expensive. By the time they pay the very expensive parking, the huge price for gasoline, they're broke. They're absolutely broke. At a time they shouldn't have to have financial worries. They got enough problems as it is with health worries. And this is something people don't realize until they get into the position that they have to expend that money for that travel they didn't anticipate. And it's very serious on a family, very, very serious. And I've had several friends that have gone through that, and indeed it is a very difficult situation financially for them. And that puts a burden. It makes the individual that is ill even more concerned about the financial affairs when they shouldn't have to worry about those at a time of illness. But that's just one minor example. And when you go through and see the devastating effect this gas regulation has had on this province. From what I understand, the oil companies think it's just great because they can reap lots of profits from this and know where the price is going to be all the time and make sure that in the world market as they buy the product, and from what I understand as well, they buy the product sometimes 6 months in advance, so they pretty well know where they're going to be when the raw materials arrive here at the refineries and they start producing the fuel. And my honourable colleague there from the NDP said there's only one other place that the gas prices is really lower than in Canada, and that's the U.S., and I can testify that. I had a trip to the U.S. last year, and the price at that time was roughly about 89 cents a litre. 89 cents a litre for gasoline. And where's crude material come from? Most of it from Canada. So there's something wrong with this picture. Something desperately wrong with this picture. So, and then we wonder why we can't compete. Our business can't compete with a U.S. company or a European company even. The Europeans can ship things in here and they pay a higher price for gas in some cases than we do, but they travel less than we do. But if somebody in the U.S. is going to compete with us, or even in this case now, New Brunswick or PEI, where the price is traditionally lower, it makes it difficult for Nova Scotia companies to compete. And as you go through this whole scenario, and it's like having a little small hole in the dam. You hear about the years ago the fairy tale with the boy putting his finger in the dam and saving the dam. Well, unfortunately, we can't put our finger in the dam because the hole's too big, and the NDP keep making it bigger and bigger. So slowly that dam is eroding away. And what I'm saying when I use the analogy with a dam is finances for families. And that's what I'm talking about. So it slowly deteriorates their financing, slowly deteriorates the ability for them to do things with their family that they should be doing. Probably vacation for a lot of people now is totally out of the question. And when I say vacation, it may be just as far as going into New Brunswick or even to Yarmouth. Of course, they do want to go to Yarmouth now because the ferry's gone that the NDP eliminated, which is very unfortunate and killed a lot of tourism in that part of the province and even in this area and as far as Cape Breton. So when you add all these things up, people don't have the disposable income they've had. They're having trouble now paying insurance. They're having trouble feeding their families. And I've had people in my office recently that said they have to make choices between heating their home and groceries. And you see it on TV and say that can't be true, but it is true, I can tell you. That is true. And every time the price of gasoline goes up, especially this, if you took regulation off and took the tax on tax off, you get almost 5 cents a litre less. 5 cents a litre. That's a lot of money, a lot of money. And I would bet you at the time when it comes that the price of gas would drop as well. Now, maybe a cent or two a litre, maybe more, who knows? But in the past, and these studies have been done, it showed the regulation artificially kept the price of gasoline up. So if you had all those things coming together, you might eventually be able to save 5, 6, 7 cents per litre. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money, especially someone that travels a distance to work. Makes a significant difference. We're seeing more and more fuel-efficient vehicles, but unfortunately, as the vehicles get more and more efficient, what's happening is the price of gas is going up with it. So you just can't keep ahead of it. You just can't keep ahead of it. And then we look at the power rates we have in this province and tie that into this price of gasoline. So, and those have been kept artificially high because this government will not intervene. They will not intervene. Our caucus goes every time that's a hearing, public utilities hearing, and intervene and make presentations outlining what the cost is to Nova Scotians and how difficult it is. The government doesn't do anything. They sit back and they watch. They watch as these increases go up. I think it's 38 or 40% now increase in power. So you get over 40% increase in price of gasoline, almost 40% in power. That means that groceries have gone up in price because the grocery stores cost more to operate, more to move their vehicles around to deliver things, more for power in the units. And as all these costs escalate, and the incomes aren't escalating to match them. And they raise the minimum wage, and that doesn't do the job. Because oftentimes when they raise the minimum wage to try to correct some of these things, it bumps somebody up in a higher tax bracket, and they actually take less money home than they did before the minimum wage went up. So you take all these factors, and these are only a couple of factors I'm talking about. There's many, many more. Property taxes are going up. This government canceled the memorandum of understanding, where they would take over services to municipalities, education costs and corrections costs and housing costs that indeed were being provided the money by the municipalities on the property taxes, So that means the only people who are paying for this in the municipalities are the property owners. Whereas in the province, they collect income tax, and everybody pays income tax, that pays income tax, would share in some of the cost of these services. And it's the whole system needs to be corrected. It really needs to be corrected. And we need to look at family. We need to take an average family in our province, 1 or 2 children, and then look at their needs of a family like that. We also need to take seniors and look at their situations, and then we need to look at businesses and see what their situations are, and see if we can come up with a fair tax structure that would mean that everybody could live a reasonable life in this province, a reasonable life. So you could go on a modest vacation. You could make sure that your children are enrolled in a hockey program or baseball or whatever it is that the children wanted to do, and to keep them off the streets, and indeed teach them some teamwork and some valuable lessons that they need through life. It would mean that seniors can stay in their homes and do the things in their homes that they need to be, and not worry about turning the thermostat up in their home, and indeed that they can still go to the grocery store and buy groceries. This gas regulation has not worked. It has not worked. It has meant more expense for families in Nova Scotia, so much for a better deal for today's families that the NDP was talking about during the election. They've proven just the opposite in all these things that said they would reverse. And just one last thing, $1 million a day goes to the increase that every Nova Scotian pays for the GST increase that this government has imposed upon them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I should point out by the attendance here in the House tonight how important this issue is, how many people are here and how important members are listening to what is going on. And that really tells the tale, doesn't it? Mr. Speaker, we can see that gas regulation is an issue for the people at home, most importantly, who are traveling to go to work each day and every day. And they're trying to figure out how can we get lower gas prices in the province of Nova Scotia. Now, there has been over the course of a number of years a variety of different opinions on this, and we've heard the Liberal Party say, oh, take the regulation off of gas, that's the answer. Well, that's not really the answer. We saw that in other places. We see in New Brunswick that the Liberals took 5 cents a litre off the gas over there, and they tried to tell everybody, we're saving you money, we're saving you money, we're saving you money. We're taking that 5 cents off a litre, and what are we doing with that? Oh, yeah, but we forgot to tell you we're putting it back on the income tax side of things, Mr. Speaker. We know how that goes. This is not about politics. This is about the reality of people and the hardships that they are facing every day traveling to and from work. Unfortunately, there is a cost associated with that. And there's no choice in the matter. They have to have a vehicle. They have to get to work. There's a lot of folks who are carpooling now, and we have the vans that travel in. Some people here in the metro area, fortunately, are able to take the bus now that they're back to work, and you know, without that minor interruption there for a few weeks. Of course, major interruption for some, but you know, Mr. Speaker, the cost is painful. That's really the only word for it when you think about having to go to the pumps and make that decision. And people are, you know, doing $10 and $20 here and there. People that I talk to want to know, what are you going to do about the price of gas? What are you going to do about the price of gas? And we see in some provinces where the gas is not regulated. I think it was Ontario last week or the week before, we saw a massive climb of a change of, I think, 8 cents a litre in a day. Now, in 2006, I believe, when gas regulation was put in by the previous government, it was done on the basis of trying to stabilize the cost, stabilize the pain to some degree, so that at least week to week, and at that time it was 2 weeks about, I believe, when that first went in, and it was at least for most people, paycheck to paycheck, you could count on the price of a litre of gas being the same thing, being the same cost. Unfortunately, that went to a week. I argued at the time that I felt that 2 weeks would have at least stayed with the mindset of stability, so that people would know at least budgeting. And people do live, unfortunately, paycheck to paycheck in this province. A great deal of people do. And, you know, part of that getting up, going to work and buying gas is part of that budgeting every 2 weeks, and they need to know what the costs are. Unfortunately, not everybody has the ability to combine travel, depending on what their jobs are and the independence that they need, and exactly what they do for a living. Some people travel on the road for a living, obviously. But we have supported in recent months here, our leader and our party, taking the tax off tax on gas. We believe that has to be looked at seriously. Government would argue that taking the taxes off would decrease funds going into general revenue, which of course would decrease funds being spent on the roads. Now, for the urban members who don't have to deal with the road issues, that may be not as big an issue for them, but I can tell you as a rural elected member, it's a big deal where I come from, and I know, Mr. Speaker, where you come from, the importance of traveling on roads. I've seen you stand in this House and on many occasions bring up the point of this road or that road. New Boston Road comes to mind of needing to have repairs, you know, and that is one of many. I know that the Ashdale Road in my area is an example. The last week or so I've been getting numerous emails and have spoke with transportation on what we're going to do for a plan, and of course they're going to say, well, we know it, there's a lot of roads we don't have the money. Where does the money come from? It's been said that the money comes back from that tax that's being charged on the gasoline. I've not seen figures recently to know that 100% of that tax is going back on the roads. I'd like to think and hope that it is, because the roads certainly need a pile of work. And I know, as you probably do, Mr. Speaker, that we need to get some road work done this construction season all over the province of Nova Scotia on bigger highways. I have the 101 highway down there. That is a large project that has been stalled for some years now, unfortunately. We're hoping to get that back underway. That's going to take money. So people do, on one hand, complain, and rightfully so, about the price of gas. And we think that we can control the price of gas here. Well, we can't. And I think when people really look at this and they know themselves that we don't have much control over what the price of gasoline is in the province of Nova Scotia. It is unfortunately set by others, by those that want to, those that can and do drive the markets, unfortunately, reflect how the prices are shot up and down. Speculators are the worst. to drive the markets. Unfortunately, there should be some law about speculation, maybe, and I don't know how you'd ever get around that, but that has been detrimental to the price of gas. Seasons, holidays, unfortunately, seem to put the price of gas up unnecessarily. You would think that the volume would be up. They wouldn't need to raise the price of gas because it's coming into summertime or long holiday weekends when we know people travel. And what do? They inflict more pain by putting the price of gasoline per litre up. That is never a pleasant time for anyone, nor is it the right thing to do. It doesn't matter. You know, you talk about regulation. One of the things that are forgotten in this province, there are service stations and companies that opt out of regulation. That is an option. Not every station does have to opt into regulation. We've heard the member for Kings North speak a few moments ago about service stations in rural Nova Scotia, specifically in Kings County in his area. We know that there have been quite a few service stations that have gone out of business because of their inability to make a substantial amount, or I say substantial, enough to even stay open and to support what it is they've been trying to do, especially in rural Nova Scotia, because again, it's a volume issue. So there is a bit of a price differential for those areas, and it has indeed saved a lot of gas stations around rural Nova Scotia that would have otherwise likely have been closed. And they'll tell you that if you visit them and you talk to them about it and you ask how it's going, they'll say the only thing that has saved us, you know, they try to sell the chocolate bars and chips and the pop and all these other little things on the side that won't pay the bills, unfortunately, that won't pay for staff. But the ability for them to have regulated gasoline and to have an adjustment mechanism in that whereby they can have a few cents maybe more a litre in smaller areas like in Lower Burlington where Doug Sanford has a store and a gas station, he's been able to stay open and survive. Well, thankfully, he's not, wouldn't call him remote, but he's rural, quite rural. In my area, he's probably 25, 30 kilometers from Windsor, where would be the most one of the closer gas stations, and of course Brooklyn, a little closer than that. Again, he's probably still 20 kilometers from Brooklyn. But he provides a good service to the folks on the shore. And thankfully he's there. So regulation and gasoline are not the biggest issue, but I think what we do need to have, and I know that we spoke as a caucus on this, is to look at the tax on tax, Mr. Speaker. And in closing, I would also say that it may not necessarily be what everyone wants, but it's been proven 48 of the last 52 weeks, there have been cheaper gas prices with regulated gas than there have with non-regulated gas, and the markets will show that. So people need to educate themselves on that as well, and I do know they get upset. We all do when we see prices, unfortunately, be driven up based on speculation. And what is the cure? I'm not sure that there will be a cure in the high price of gasoline. We know in Europe for many years now, gas has been very high, the cost of fuel. It's catching up with us here, unfortunately, in North America, and certainly here in Canada, and we're not immune to that, that's for sure, Mr. Speaker. And I see we're just about through with the time allotted for late debate, Mr. Speaker, so with those few words, I will take my seat.
Thank you, and I want to thank all members for their participation in tonight's debate. The time allotted for late debate is now expired. We shall stand adjourned until 12 noon tomorrow. We are adjourned.